Okay guys, I have tried to do this a few times, but my camera got too full, so here we go again. So, I've been wanting to talk about something, and I think the best way for me to do that is by talking to you on video, and I don't think I'm going to be able to articulate myself properly through a blog post or just through a simple Instagram caption. So here goes. First of all, I just want to put a little trigger warning out there for traumatic birth. If you've experienced a traumatic birth, you might be a little bit more sensitive to this, although I'm not going to go into anything too detailed. You may even resonate with me, and you may even have advice for me, or you may be like, okay, I feel exactly the same that Natalie does. And I also wanted to say that obviously this is my journey, and I always like to explain when I tell my story that this is my journey, this is not your journey. So if you are pregnant, don't get upset by my story, because that is my story and you're not on the same journey as me. And on the other hand, when I'm receiving information or advice from people, I always try to take what is good for me and remember that that's their journey and it's not my journey. And you just take the good from it that you need to, but don't take everything on board. So I may have to stop and start. We'll see how we go. So I want to talk about traumatic birth. So a lot of you will know, if you've been following me for a while, that when I had Ari, I had pre-eclampsia and hellp syndrome. So this is something that happened at the very end of the pregnancy. I had an absolutely beautiful pregnancy. I did everything that I wanted to. I exercised. I ate mostly what I wanted, other than when I felt unwell. I was one of those people who loved being pregnant. I loved dressing my bump, going out. I felt comfortable. And it got to the end of the pregnancy at about 36 weeks where I started to feel quite sick. I felt unwell, but I was a bit confused. I thought that it was just the end of having a baby, and that everybody felt uncomfortable at the end of having a baby. And it was my first time, and I didn't know any different. And it started at about 36 weeks, and I got to about 38 weeks where I started to think, you know what, I really don't think that this is just normal. I feel like this is something more than just the baby running out of room, or me just feeling uncomfortable, or having a little bit of a tummy ache, that kind of thing. And the biggest issue that I had was that I had a pain under my ribs. And prior to that day, I thought that the pain was just the baby running out of room, maybe his little legs getting into me. And yeah, so as I said, it got to a point where I thought, no, this is enough. So I then told my midwife that I wasn't feeling good, and I met her and we did some tests, and it decided that I would go to hospital. I won't tell the full story because I do have that in a blog post, which I will link in my stories. And yeah, so we went to hospital, and that day I found out that while I was 38 weeks pregnant, that I also had pre-eclampsia and hellp syndrome. So I still remember the day that the nurse came into. I get really emotional when I tell this part, because I actually feel really bad for the nurse who had to tell me that I had pre-eclampsia. I wasn't very symptomatic. I didn't have swelling. I didn't have any of the things that you would normally think that somebody with pre-eclampsia would. And a lot of people don't even know what pre-eclampsia is. Some people call it a silent killer. So my blood pressure wasn't even particularly high. That's one thing that they'll check, but I did have protein in my urine. So anyway, I went to the hospital. I thought maybe it might be a bladder infection, so sent Ryan to work. And the next minute, the nurse comes into my little bed. And just before she did, I actually had this feeling like, you know what? I don't think I should have sent Ryan to work. I actually think that there's something wrong with me. So she came in and she said, Natalie, I'm really sorry to tell you this, but you've got pre-eclampsia. And I didn't know much about it, funnily enough, other than that Kim Kardashian had it, because I remember years ago watching an episode of the Kardashians, and she had it when she was pregnant with North, you know, when she got really puffy, because that's what normally happens with pre-eclampsia. And I can still remember her face telling me, and I feel so bad for her. And it was so scary for me too, because you could just tell that she didn't want to tell me that. She didn't want to tell me. And it's funny how you can feel bad for somebody else in that situation. So anyway, so they told me that I may have to have a C-section, and the sort of the minutes rolled on and they did an internal. They decided that I was actually 3 centimeters dilated and that I would have him naturally. And so I did, and they hooked me up to all of the things to induce him, because I was told that I needed to have him quick, because with pre-eclampsia my life was in danger. They were monitoring him the whole time and he was completely fine, but I wasn't fine. The whole time, really, when you have preeclampsia, your life is in danger if it gets that far, as what mine has, not in the early days, or mine did. And yeah, they rigged up all of the stuff to induce me. They broke my waters. They only just waited for Ryan to come. At first, they just wanted to do it straight away because it was such an emergency, but I managed to get them to just wait. And literally the moment he walked in the room, they put the hook and they broke the waters. And it was a 4-hour active labor. But when you look back, like, in the moment, I did really, really well. I'd done a calm birth course. I pulled on everything I had to make that birth as beautiful as I possibly could, given the situation that I was in. But when you look back, it was actually really traumatic. And it's something that bothered me for a long time. It bothered me up until I was pregnant with Chloe, and I'd think about it, but I'd shut it off. And funnily enough, if I ever had a night where I had a couple of champagnes, I'd end up crying, because I guess you suppress things, which I try not to do anymore. So during the birth, I had to have magnesium fluid put into me to stop my brain from having a seizure, because I'm gonna have a break. Okay, deep breaths. I've forgotten a little bit what I was up to, but so basically they put the magnesium in me to stop my brain from having a seizure, and I was very restricted in the birth. I could basically be on the bed or I could be on the ball, and I had 2 tubes coming from me, and they had the induction fluid in one and the magnesium to stop my brain from swelling in the other. And then I also had to have a catheter in, and they were monitoring how much urine was coming out, and I was only allowed to drink 100 mils of water every hour. And they wanted to see that was coming out, because also my kidneys had the potential to fail, as well as the pain in my chest that I had mentioned before was actually my liver failing. So the preeclampsia, which had developed into hellp syndrome, is basically causing a lot of my internal organs to fail. So with all of this obviously going on, this is going to amount to you looking back on that feeling like it's a traumatic birth. And, you know, with all of that too, he did end up coming out naturally, but a few times I was told I would have to have a C-section. I signed for a C-section, so you go through that in your head a few times as well. When he came out, I also lost a lot of blood. I actually can't remember the amount, but I had thought it was between 2 and 3 liters, but I'll have to actually find that out so I can tell you correctly what the amount was. But it was a very substantial blood loss, and that was because, as well as everything else, my platelets were low. So when he came out, my blood didn't clot, and the hospital were amazing. They were absolutely incredible. My midwife was incredible. They did everything to make sure that everything could go as the best as it possibly could, and I was able to have my baby naturally. My baby was healthy. I obviously came off worse for wear, but even 2 weeks later, you wouldn't have known that I was that sick. So all of this, you know, you look back on it and it feels traumatic. And during the labor, there was a point where I asked one of the obstetricians if I was going to die. And it's funny, because so much of my head felt extremely positive and very calm because of the calm birth. But obviously there was another part of me that did fear for my life, and I guess why wouldn't you if you've got all of these things going on as well and people are telling you that this is quite bad and you need to have the baby soon. And I still remember I was on the Fitball and he put his hands on my knees and he said, "Natalie, you are not going to die." So that's just a memory that sticks in my mind now. And then even in the recovery, I lost my blood somehow. I avoided going to ICU, even though some people thought I would. Obviously, they try to keep you with your baby, so I was able to stay on birth suite with Ari, and I had the magnesium going through me for, I think, maybe a day after that to make sure I didn't have a brain seizure. And I had to have a nurse in the room with me all the time, so it couldn't just be Ryan, Ari and I. It had to be someone medical with us as well. And I was in hospital for 5 days. They thought it could be longer, but my body did recover quite well. And in the time after that, I had to have a blood transfusion and an iron transfusion because my red blood cells weren't bouncing back. So I'm one very grateful recipient to a blood transfusion. I can't give blood, but I guess one message I can give is to give blood, because it can be, even in recovery, it can be life-changing for people that I just wasn't bouncing back. So I needed to have the blood. So anyway, after leaving hospital, I was terrified to be home with him. One other thing I should mention is that when I was in hospital, I also fainted. When I got up for the first time to have a shower, I fainted, and I had fainted before. So I said to Ryan that I was going to faint, and he said, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Yes." And then he caught me and led me on the ground. But for about 2 weeks after going home, I was terrified of being home with my baby in case I fainted by myself. So I had either my mum or Ryan's mum with me, and I wasn't left alone ever. If Ryan left for work, somebody came over because I was just so anxious. But then my body healed, and 2 weeks later, I think the last thing to bounce back was my liver. But you really wouldn't have known. If you look back on photos, I didn't look well, but you really wouldn't have thought that something like that would have happened. And since having him, I have been told a few times different things, like I was knocking on death's door that day, and that if it wasn't, if I had had him 200, 300 years ago, I would have died, because I needed all of those things to keep me alive. So yeah, and for months, as I said, I was really, really upset. I did deal with it really, really well considering, but I definitely had moments where I was upset, and I always wanted more children, and I felt like I couldn't have more children for lots of different reasons. I felt selfish that what if something happened to me again? I was scared for my life, obviously, as well. And I also even felt selfish that I wasn't scared for my baby's life, that I was always scared for my life. Like, why wasn't I worried that something would happen to my baby? And I guess it's because the whole time I was always told that he was perfectly healthy, even when they were monitoring him during the labor. So anyway, we obviously went on to have Chloe, and I almost made her middle name Faith, because I felt like it took every bit of faith that I had to have her. And I had a similar situation to what I had now, that I was quite upset a couple of days after I found out I was pregnant, and the initial excitement wore off, and just very stressed until I got a plan in place to basically gain control over what was happening. And that's what I've done now. So I think if you've had a traumatic birth before and you want to have more children, you need to make sure that you feel in control. So make sure you get a system in place and a team around you of people that's going to make you feel in control, because when you've got a traumatic situation like that, there's a huge part of you that feels like you've lost control. So you need to grab as much as you can. And over the next few months, I'll go over some other things as well about how I've dealt with that as well, and things that I will take in my hospital bag to make sure that I feel in control as well. And Yeah, and I was obviously nervous in Chloe's pregnancy. Pre-eclampsia, I don't think you can get it before 20 weeks. I'm always fine up until this point, as much as I do have moments where I'm nervous. I know that's not going to come back. With Chloe, I didn't get it, which was really great. I'm not as likely to get it now. That I've had it the first time, and I don't like to get into the statistics or the information because I still find it even confusing why I got it, my likelihood to have it again, what the statistics are anyway. But I just think that anyone who's pregnant or thinking of getting pregnant should do their research on pre-eclampsia and what the symptoms are and what's involved, because it is a silent killer. So you do need to be aware. And I think during pregnancy, you always need to be aware of your body. And the biggest thing that I would ever want to teach anyone who is pregnant is I would want to teach them that if you don't feel very well, then tell somebody and go to hospital or go to the doctors. If you get pushed away even, which I didn't, obviously, just make sure that you always fight within you and externally to just basically know your body. And if you don't feel good, make sure that you go. And that's the mistake that I made, is that I obviously didn't feel very well, but I didn't go, or I just put it down to different things. I always thought, oh, what if I go to hospital and there's nothing wrong with me? Well, you know what? That's the best case situation. If you go to hospital and you're pregnant and there's nothing wrong with you, then that's awesome. So don't ever feel embarrassed or like you're wasting anyone's time by going to hospital if you don't feel good and you're pregnant. So I will never do that again. And then when I had Chloe, I had a placental abruption, which also happened on the day that I delivered her. So the way I have felt at times is that it's almost like Labor Day is D-Day for me, and the past 2 labors, something's gone wrong. Even though Chloe's wasn't bad, it still was a bit of, you need to have her within, I had to go into active labor within 2 hours, and I may have to have a C-section if it doesn't happen quick enough, that kind of thing. So I have felt like birth is a D-Day for me and what's going to go wrong. So that's something that I have to overcome with this pregnancy, is not looking at the due date like it's got negativity attached to it, which is how I feel at the moment. And I want to be able to just look at that due date with only positivity and only feel like I'm excited to meet my baby. So I'll be working on that. Maybe I can share a little bit of that. I did calm birth with both of my pregnancies. I'm not sure what I'm going to do yet. I'll probably do calm birth again because I loved it so much. But yeah, it's something that I need to work on, is getting more excited for the actual day that the baby's born and putting aside any worry that I have with it. I'm also big on, if I put negative things out there, that negative things can come back. So I want to make sure I stay positive. So I don't want this conversation to be about me putting negativity onto you, because that's not what it's about. In sharing my story, there are positives that I want to come out of it for you. I want you, if you're getting pregnant or you are pregnant, to do your research on pre-eclampsia and HELP syndrome and know the symptoms and know what to keep an eye out for. I want you to keep your health seriously. If any different medical checks come up that you can possibly do for anything, then do them. Don't brush over them. Keep yourself healthy. Keep your baby healthy. I want anyone who's experienced a traumatic birth and who wants another child to draw from me, and I want to help you be brave in what you're doing, just as I'm drawing on everything that I have to be brave in this as well. And the same with Chloe. Honestly, it took every single ounce of faith that I could ever draw up to get pregnant with Chloe. And then again now, I have to draw on just having faith that everything's going to be okay and faith in my body. So that's another thing. And I just want to be there for you if you are going through the same experience, or if you have been through the same experience as well. I would love to hear about your births, if you've had a less than perfect birth as well. And yeah, I just wanted to share this story with you, because not everything is always as it seems and everything's all roses and perfect. I've obviously got this in the back of my mind all of the time, and it's something that I'm working through. And I'm sure that there are other people like me too. So I will definitely keep you guys up to date on how I'm dealing with it all and sharing the journey with you. But most of all, I am just really, really grateful for this little girl that I'm growing inside of me. And I can't wait for her to get here and to know that everybody is safe and happy and healthy. And I'm enjoying sharing this journey with you guys. And if you ever want to reach out and ask me more about my story with pre-eclampsia, I'm happy to point you in the direction of different pages that are available even on Instagram and different resources. I would love to help you with that. So thank you for listening. I hope that I didn't make anyone too upset or anything like that. I hope that you took positivity from this.